everyone, and welcome to I Don't Have Time to Make You Happy webinar. My name is Pascal Hansen. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Zeta, and I have the honor and privilege of being joined by Shannon Pearson, Kindy Gill, Richard Johnson, and Pepita McKee. And so the reason why we chose the title, I Don't Have Time to Make You Happy, it's really because we think that's what's top of mind for a lot of people managers in the C-suite. But before we get to that, I'm just going to have everyone do a brief introduction of what they do. So why don't we start with you, Shannon?
Yeah, thank you, Pascal, for organizing this. My name is Shannon Pearson. I am a management consultant, and I help companies with employee engagement through mediation and really focusing on their organizational development.
And Richard.
All right, I'm Richard Johnson, and I'm a partner and co-founder with Ascent Employment Law. I've been a lawyer for about 17 years, and the lion's share of that relates to all things workplace law. So that's my lane, and I love to assist employers, employees as well, but mostly employers with risk management, dealing with their staffing, and all things that attach to that. Love my practice and the people that I work with. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Kindy.
Hi, Pascal. Hi, everybody else. I'm Kindy. My profession, I'm qualified as a chartered accountant with corporate finance background, was a CEO for a business which grew from about 20 million Canadian turnover level to about 130 million under my stewardship. That sort of was all done before I was 40. A lot of change, a lot of leadership that was done in that experience. And then I became a stay-at-home mom. Change in leadership and manipulation and motivation and trying to get people sort of on board onto the same goal was a little bit more difficult at home than it was actually in that business with 3,000 people in it. So I now specialize in your unconscious bias, like how it affects you, why your behavior is the way that it is, and what can actually be done sort of from the inside out to motivate you to become more of a leader and responsible for your life.
Thanks, Kindy. And Pepita.
Thank you, Pascal. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again, Pascal, for having me. I'm a sociologist and anthropologist by trade, doing this for 20 plus years, mostly internationally, but as well here in Canada. I currently am the CEO and founder of Impact Resolutions. Our primary service areas are performance assurance standards, impact assessment, and diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging services. So we're a social science driven organization with 40 plus people on the team. So thank you. Very pleased to be here and meeting everyone. Thank you again.
Fantastic. So when we think about I don't have time to make you happy, we're thinking that's what business owners, the C-suite are thinking. I'm sure people under them feel that as well. So Kindy, given that you ran a large team, can you talk a little bit about your experience and if that rang true for you?
Oh, it absolutely did ring true for me because first of all, when you're actually at the top of the chain, it's a lonely place to be. There's a lot of responsibility that you hold for the business that you're responsible for and the people that you've employed. And there's a lot of things coming at you day in, day out. So although intuitively you know that the soft skills that everybody employs in your organization are critical and really, really important for your success, they're the sort of almost the last item on your agenda because you're servicing the needs of your clients, you're servicing the needs of whatever crisis has come in that day. You've got a lot to do with the bottom line that you've got to sort out in terms of reporting and who you're responsible to. So when you're right at the top, you almost sort of want to not have to mollycoddle your staff. You just want them to get on with it because that's what they're employed for. And so for me, this title of like, I don't have time to make you happy was really, really resonant because at the end of the day, I barely got time to function through the organization with the crises I'm facing and the strategicness of what I'm moving into, that I haven't got time to concentrate on whether you've got a grumpy face or whether you're complaining or whether you're moaning or whether you're unhappy or with what's happening with you personally. Sorry.
And so Shannon, when you work with companies, I'm sure you see how that trickles down, right? So culture kind of trickles down from the top. So can you speak to that?
I can, and I think it's everything that you said, Kindy. I see it play out with all the clients I've worked with, where the owners are focusing at that, 50,000-foot view, and then as you move through a hierarchy, that view becomes closer and closer to boots on the ground. Really, where it lands with me is working with boots on the ground and helping them to understand it's not a lack of care. There's great care that happens at that 50,000 view. That's what I mean, really, that's what most leaders say. They really care about what's happening. They cannot dig into the weeds as much. So really it's about, how do we message that? How do we actually take that perspective at the top of an organization and deliver it in a context that is appropriate and that lands with the viewpoint of the people that are doing that tactical work day in, day out, and bring them not into the details of it per se, but into an appreciation and understanding that everybody matters. How you matter is what we need to figure out and communicate effectively.
And so, Richard, from your perspective, I think there is a risk, let's say that someone at the top, in the instance where maybe they don't care, right? And so then they act accordingly. So how do you set that up so you're minimizing the risk of having lots of lawsuits because people aren't happy and they leave? Like, is there something that can be done from that perspective?
Absolutely. And if I had a nickel for every time I heard about, I don't have time to make you happy, but that's not the answer. The answer isn't, well, pardon me here, everyone, but these millennials, they just want to use Kindy's term, be mollycoddled. That is a common perception, right? But that's not the end of the analysis. I think trickle down, like Shannon said, is the absolute way to do it. You can delegate some of these approaches where you're actually attending to what will motivate your people. But to just say, we're going to turn a blind eye to what our people need, or accommodations from a human rights perspective, or mental health issues, whatever's driving behaviors in the workplace, you can't just turn a blind eye, because you either have to adapt or you will die as an organization. So that's kind of the lane in which I deal with it is, okay, the law says this, practically we need to deal with this. How do we make that work administratively so it's not all resting on your shoulders as the CFO, or she might be the CEO, or what have you?
Right.
So I think delegation is going to be an essential part of the discussion, in my view, where I come in to advise.
So, Pepita, I know you and your team, you do a lot about diversity and inclusion, which seems to be a really hot topic these days. So from your perspective, in a very practical level, what you teach and suggest that business owners implement, can you talk a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, thank you, Pascal. And I also really resonate with what has been discussed so far. And having spent a good chunk of my career before Impact Resolutions, starting companies, hiring and managing teams on behalf of owners, I was able to really think about, what am I doing here as I'm starting this company? And so I hope my perspective as a small business owner in their first 10 years, 7 years this year, will help and resonate with others who might be listening to this discussion. And it was really having to take a step back and first ask myself, what do I think people want? In a management consulting firm context, your team's abilities based on their happiness is critical, because your vision will not be executed if consideration and care isn't put into, well, what do people want, right? That first instance. So I come from
Oh, I think Pepita froze. Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know if she's going to unfreeze, but Pepita does bring up a good point. So it really comes back to what drives you.
Sorry there. What did I miss?
You froze for a second.
Okay, what did I last say? Sorry, Pascal.
I don't know, but I was sort of segueing in from what you said. So I think what you're really sharing is that it comes down to what drives leadership. So what is your vision, right?
That is, what is the vision? And then I took a second step to survey, well, the ideal target workforce that I need. What do you need? what do you need? What does job satisfaction in a good way look like for you? And it was interesting. The top 3 things, you know, my interpretation, while people want to be entrepreneurial, they want the ability to create something, to do something meaningful, and for me to provide the infrastructure for them to do that. And when I did survey 50 plus people, and again, it was just only 50 plus people, the top 3 things for people were meaningful work, benefits, and flexibility. But the thing that, and the 4th item, which I really took to heart, is that they have an organization that gives them clear expectations. So again, humanize the machine. Why are they a cog? How does it impact the process and the system of which you're working in? If you can alleviate that, that's going to reduce the tensions in your environment that might escalate unconscious bias, right? If people are too busy working and thinking about what they're doing, then they're not going to take the training, if you will, to mitigate unconscious bias, or not have the time to think about what they're saying, or understanding like, okay, there's a protocol to good teamwork. And if the leader hasn't consciously executed those principles, and I think you have to question, do you have a quality product, especially in a consulting environment? So I hope that perspective is helpful.
I love the term humanize the machine. By the way, I wrote that down.
Oh, right.
Trademark,
Yeah.
but I love it.
Yeah.
Transformers came to mind.
Well, and you hear that often, like throughout my career, I'm reaching 50, and we talked about millennials, but we also have Gen Zers. Like, this is just like in a more awakened, more inherently cumulative way of thinking about work. So if we can change I think we have, it's a root cause analysis immediately. And if you can do that upfront work within your organization, that's going to alleviate a lot of this, I guess, sort of, well, how far do I need to go before I know that I've done everything I can, and before it goes to lawyers, before it goes to here, you know what I mean? Like, let's kind of hit it off at the pass, sort of is the approach.
So just because I'm used to analyzing risks, I love everything you said, but when you said I want to hire people that are entrepreneurial, I see the pros and cons of that. So I'm thinking, if I'm hiring someone in my business and they're too entrepreneurial, does that mean you're going to leave after a year or two? Do I have to be in constant?
Absolutely. That's right. You kind of have to let go of this expectation. You have to encourage an environment where they're just going to want to stay. That's kind of the other rolling dynamic for leadership. So, it's set up in our company in a way where experts continue to be experts, and they produce, and I ensure they have the environment to produce. But we have quality assurance, quality control to know that if there is 10 writers in a particular piece, they just have to be experts. We make it pretty. We have quality assurance, quality control to do the one voice. Again, it's just an example of ensuring that your workforce have clear expectations and they feel like a human being part of this organization versus as a cog.
Yeah, and I think, but I also, and I'd like to hear what you think, Kindy, Shannon, and Richard. So I think there has to be some sort of balance between what do you employees want, what's going to make you happy, but then it's also, well, what is my vision, and what about me being happy as a business owner? Like,
totally. That's what I'm still working out.
Yeah.
I've gotten to the 7-year mark. I'm like, okay, now I need to sustain myself. So I'd love to hear from you guys.
Kindy, your thoughts?
My thought at the outset on this is like, it's very pretty to be thinking about all of these aspects, right? About how do you humanize an organization, how do you get the best out of people. But if you really think about it, when you go back to the original step of employing someone, it's a bargain. There's a contract, there's a list of duties, and then there's a payment. And we've got in this theme that the elephant in the room is the money, right? And there's something about that issue about money that ought to be tabled really honestly and cleanly. Because when there's a transaction, i.e. a bargain, you're getting paid X and in return you're doing Z, that in itself is very clinical. And so, but it's a huge motivator, because without money, money talks, and without money, there's power, and there's lots of survival biases in us as human beings. So without the money, we go nowhere. So there's a lot that happens in companies which has the carrot and the sort of the reward and the stick idea. And I know certainly as a chief executive, I was able to deploy the reward and sort of stick idea very, very well, because those that were very motivated by getting paid a decent bonus, by getting paid a decent salary, would put all of whatever they had as in terms of their energy and skill set and everything towards the vision. But if you weren't able to match that need in terms of what that person's expectation was around how they ought to be rewarded, a gap arose, right? But the person right at the top already has to worry about the money, because their job is to actually make money, and they're going to be looking for areas as to how to skimp and save and not do various things. So you've got a clash. And everybody ought to recognize that there's a clash. Yeah. And the minute you're honest about the fact that the clash exists, something can be done about nurturing someone's motivation, or making them happier, or helping them to become more pro the company's vision. Something can be done about that, more so if people are really honest about the clash that exists. And then the other part is the investment in another human being. Now, I know for sure, I've seen it over and over and over, is that when you don't invest in yourself and it's been done for you, someone's thrown something at you, some training, some coaching, something, you're not going to value it as much as if it had come out of your pocket and you put that investment on the table for yourself. So when an organization is being asked to invest in their people, that has to be done in a way where the people are motivated to be invested in. And so for that, I know that the only clue that I've found is that if the gain in the training or the coaching helps them at a personal level beyond just the output that's required for the business, they're going to be more motivated. If it affects their family life, if it affects their relationships outside, if it affects the quality of their being on this earth, then they're going to be more motivated to come on board. But if it's all about output within the organization and it's being thrown at them as free, you're not going to get people's buy-in, because it didn't cost them anything.
Yep.
Yeah, no,
skin in the game.
Yeah, skin in the game. What are your thoughts, Shannon?
So many. A lot of where this kind of intersects with what I do is, especially when it comes to conflict resolution and mediation in the workplace, it doesn't work if the participants aren't willing. So this kind of speaks to what you were saying, Kindy. It doesn't matter if it's development through courses or resolving conflict or performance management. If the person doesn't invest in the process, the outcome will not be sustainable. So you may get that one moment where there's the clouds part and the sun shines, and you feel like we're over that difficult moment, but it will come back. So back to terms like root cause analysis, really evaluating what matters to a person. And just a really quick example of this was working with an employee who wanted to know what the future would look like. So this comes up with, what is the vision of the company? Where is it going? Where are the opportunities for advancement? None of that really actually mattered, because this individual couldn't turn around and say what mattered to them, like what would actually provide their fulfillment. So there's a very clear line. However, it gets quite muted in these conversations that happen, because as much as we want to be able to provide direction and opportunity for employees, they have to meet us halfway. Employees have to invest in their own success as much as the employer provides the opportunities to get that success. So if this is a relationship, it is reciprocal all the time. The level of responsibility, and this is where I come across this conversation quite a bit with employees, is the employer has a massive responsibility, and how they execute that is what comes under fire quite often. But ultimately, if an employee doesn't really value what an employer is doing or providing for them, they need to own that too. They need to make their decisions. And if they want to go and open their own business and have that entrepreneurial experience, there's every opportunity to do that. But if they choose to not do that, then the other side is taking a look at what will they bring to the table and how will they invest.
So one question we have here, what are some of the top components of what you believe would help provide clear expectations with the 4 employees? And is that something you can put in writing, Richard? Is that part of good management?
Well, definitely it is.
Yeah.
And it is. And so I come at this question or this issue from 2 points of view. By the time I get involved in scenarios, it's kind of interesting based on the money issue, the elephant in the room, right? Because I find that the legal system puts a dollar amount on people's claims. But that is only a part of the equation, right? There's so much about fairness and equality and respect and time off and childcare accommodation, whatever it is, that can be done before the relationship sours. By the time I get involved, right, it's all about, well, it's transactional, dollars and cents to make good on somebody's dignity. That doesn't right things. And so I think the opportunity to deal with some of this stuff is right at the front end of a relationship in the workplace. And then secondly, 2 things. In terms of setting objectives, you definitely can set them up in writing, and I recommend you do, because transparency, I think we're all in agreement, is key.
Yeah.
And you got to be careful. I like colloquialisms. You got to be careful not to let the tail wag the dog. You're still a business owner, right? So it's easy to run around saying, what would make you happy? And I get we need to do that, but you can only do that so much without jeopardizing the company's, whatever it is that you've set up as your major goals. And so I recommend having your major goals clearly delineated as a business owner or as a C-suite or what have you, and then filter those down to the employees. And so long as you've got a bubble that the company stands for with its goals inside the bubble and all the stuff the company wants, and every employee has their own little set of goals and their drives and motivations, as long as each individual employee is inside the major bubble of the company, tickety boo, you're good, because everybody's able to push ahead. It's where the company has got its own bubble and an employee's out there, with different motivations that are not in alignment. So put it in writing, make sure everybody's on board. If they're not, address it right away, because then you're going to have this opposition.
And sorry, can I just jump in?
Yeah, of course.
On that. I completely agree with everything Richard said, and where it really matters is in those moments where it's not cleared up. And an employee comes forward and says, I meant this. And the employer's going, well, that's not what I agreed to. So the lens and the perspective that we all have, and everybody has their own unique perspective on things. So that documentation is so important, and it's hard to get. It really, I find that quite a bit with employers and employees alike. It is hard to get people to agree to, this is a reasonable expectation and this is what I'm willing to agree to, and move forward from there. And then it's like sand, it just keeps shifting and shifting and shifting. And by the point where it becomes something that has to get addressed, now that's when you call Richard.
And accountability is so key, right? It's like, yeah, shifting sands don't do anybody any good. But when you say this is the goal and this is what you're taking this on, right?
Yeah.
You're going to be responsible for this, right? That's really key.
Yeah. Timelines. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing, if I have to sort of summarize loosely, basically you have to have a detailed vision first, right? As leadership, you have to be able to sell that vision so you can hire people that buy into your vision, right? They have to be on board. But then you also have to, because no one has like a perfect hiring method. So you hire someone that you think has that intrinsic motivation, that's a good fit for your company in terms of your culture. Now, after a few months, you discover they're toxic, and that's a very broad term. So for some reason, they're sort of infecting the team. Now other people are unhappy. Ideally, you get rid of that person really fast. But again, you got to do it the right way so you don't have a lawsuit. So, right, I think people hang on too long to the people that are infecting the rest of the team. And when that person's in the C-suite, and have bonuses and they're friends with people, they'll stay there for a long time. Kindy, you're eager to say something.
Oh, yeah, I am eager to say something because
Yeah.
as a chief executive, that was the natural response that you get rid of or you move sideways or whatever when there's something toxic happening. But the truth is, we all are inherently, even everybody on this panel here, imperfect. We've all got our quirks, we've all got our patterns, we all come from these biases that have been impregnated into us through our environment, through our upbringing, all sorts of, like our culture, our religion, everything, right? So when you come into an organization, nobody can really handle the magnitude of the different biases that are coming to play. So something gets termed as toxic, when really it's a cry to say that I haven't yet nurtured or awakened the aspect within me that's capable of connecting with another human being at a level that's humane. So it's a sign of imperfection. And now, if I'm completely honest with you, because of the tools that I've used and the training that I've had with the Dalian School of Health and Consciousness, I now know that there are tools and training methods that are possible to help remove the bias that isn't working for the collective, so that the individual that is perceived as being inadequate, toxic, insecure, irresponsible, immature, whatever the phrases might be, that individual can grow into more of who they are. But at the same time, the whole organization doesn't actually lose out on the skill sets that have been nurtured, that there is a lot of wealth of knowledge that's already been accumulated. There's a lot that actually is invested in that human being that's of benefit. So there is a way of training people now to get to a point where we don't automatically run to the answer is an exit program.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you, but I think at some point, if you work with an employee and then you discover that whatever their issues aren't temporary, it's not fixable, then
Yeah.
I think speed is of the essence, because if you try to help that person and they're not invested in it, or you can't help them, because let's say they're a malignant narcissist, there is no cure. And you really have to make sure that they leave the company before everyone else leaves, because now you have all this other talent leaving because this person stayed too long. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think there's a timing issue.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying in terms of the urgency, but I beg to differ on the fact that we can label people with certain traits and they're just boxed in that certain way, because most human traits can be reversed. Most human traits are there in their adverse form because they have the possibility of being transformed to the opposite form. So, and I've seen too much of that experience in the last 17 years to be able to deny what I now know. But when I was running those businesses, I genuinely felt like you, Pascal, where there were certain things that there was something that was so hot and so much of a higher priority that the only solution I had was to cut, employ new, bring in fresh, get a new type of energy coming in. And I was constantly changing and leading in a very, very sort of cutthroat sort of way in some ways.
Yeah.
But it was necessary, or I felt like it was necessary, because it felt like it was the only solution I had. Now I bring caution to that, because I genuinely know that there are more solutions in place that can help nurture the best in everything. Not in every scenario, because if you're hell bent on not actually wanting to move, like Shannon was saying earlier, and you're not willing and you are determined to stay fixed in your ways and you're just going to be so scared of change and you're very rigid, yeah, sure. But where there's flexibility and there's movement and willingness, there are now tools to be used to help nurture the best.
Yeah, so I do agree the first step would be to sit down with the person and find out what's going on with them, right? I'm not saying
often they don't know.
But
often they don't know, Pascal, because it's an unconscious aspect within them. By nature, that means that they're unaware of what they're doing, and they actually even don't believe that they're doing that. So it's about helping people to see what you see. So it's helping them to see through their own eyes the aspect that you're already seeing on the outside, and that's the trick.
Right.
Yes.
So call Kindy first before you fire anyone. Just call Kindy. Let her work with the individual. Be humane, right?
And I love what you're saying, Kindy, if I can just hop in, and the training, I feel like what was really helpful for us is to have an assessor on the outside, really looking at the health of our organization. So we were very specific in terms of, okay, you can't fix what you don't know. And for individuals, for staff, for leadership, for all.
Oh, no.
Oh, she just froze again.
Yeah, and
Shannon, do you want to give your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, I'm writing down her statement. You can't fix what you don't know, because we often
Doing
say
an
if it ain't.
assessment. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, you froze. So Shannon was speaking.
I was
Oh,
just,
no problem. Go ahead, Shannon.
well, I was just writing down your statement, can't fix what you don't know, and I was going to kind of riff on that. But can you go back to that point and say you can't fix what you don't know?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
what was where was that leading you to?
Yeah. So, in the early years of IR, we appreciated that we can't assess for ourselves the health of our organization from the top
Yeah.
to the
Oh, from the top to the
bottom.
bottom. Yeah.
Yeah.
Get that
And that's kind of where I was actually going to take it anyway, was really when you're in the organization, and
Sorry
I've
about
done
that.
this.
I got you here.
Sorry,
Shannon.
let's just let Shannon finish her thought. We'll come back to you, Pepita.
Sounds good.
Yeah, the idea of being embedded in an organization has pros and cons, just like anything else. So being embedded, you get to see and feel and hear, and you experience the true culture. The challenge with that is trying to stay at that perspective where you can be very, very objective when it comes to managing these situations, and it can get quite challenging. I've done this with a few clients over the years where you're embedded in there, and it's almost like the organization puts their arms around you and says, "No, you're one of us now. You're in." Right. So it comes with some great benefits. The challenge is always within self to make sure that you can go to that 50,000 foot view when you need to, but also be boots on the ground when it serves. It is a really hard thing to do. And it's hard for people to still align themselves with you and trust the purpose that you're serving. So trust is really a big aspect in this, trusting the leadership and trusting that what's being offered, as whether it's being performance managed or whether it's, some of the tools, the courses that Kindy was referring to, or the experiences you've had, Pepita, with your own organization. It's really about making sure that the people that are going through that process or going through a course are truly invested with the trust that it's going to serve the agreed to purpose. That comes back to the question of how do we keep those expectations clear, right? So there's everything, there's a thread that comes through all of this, and it can all get tied back to that element of trust. And again, I finish most of my sentences off, when that's broken, you call Richard.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a key point, because it's trust, and that's a feeling. So even if you're in the C-suite and you have a vision, you communicate it, and people don't feel it, then they're not going to buy into it.
And that is subjective too. And that's where
Right.
it gets very, very tricky with people, because a lot of times, and I just had this conversation the other day, when you are being told things that a person believes you want to hear, all bets are off.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of leaders are in that place where they ask for feedback. They say, no, challenge me, get angry with me, dig into that stuff. It is a big ask. It is counterintuitive, and it is not in keeping with self-preservation in a lot of environments, right? So if that's to happen, then the trust has to be so high. And then that takes us into the topic of psychological safety in the workplace. And that is deep, deep work. And I think, worth every investment, but it's a fairly new practice, I think, in the whole grand scheme of things.
Truth is always felt, though. So if something's being said and a vision is being presented in a certain way, then truth is always heard between the lines as to whether that is actual surface manipulation or whether there's a genuine intention in there that is asking for people to step up, to challenge, etc., and do what is being said by the mouth, right? Because somewhere under the current, we all tune into the truth of a conversation when you know that you are just being sold a story to move you from A to B, or whether you are being asked to do something that is a genuine like team collaboration and a boots on the ground type attempt to move something forward. You know the truth, you know the difference.
Mm.
But I think also, I mean, I've spoken.
That's why in a culture where, Pascal, you're saying like, you know, someone's a narcissistic, this and this and this and this, right? You've seen the truth of that. Someone else has felt the truth of that. Someone else has felt the truth of it. They're all watching from a distance and they know what is happening with that individual. It's being seen, whether it's being spoken about or not. It's just being felt.
Yeah, and I know that I've spoken to people that have worked for very large companies where, you know, maybe they're starting out in their career. You know, they've bought into the vision of the company, there's an issue, and they go to HR because they're like, that's the place, they're going to help me. And then they have the experience. This is true for a lot of people I've spoken to. They thought HR was their friend and there to protect them. And their experience was, no, they're actually just protecting the C-suite and the shareholders. So they've had a really bad experience in one company. I'm not saying this is all HR people, but they've had that one bad experience. Now their trust is taken, it's damaged. Now that becomes part of who they are. Then they go to a different company. They're going to be very hesitant, right, to go to HR in the new place. Right?
They'll project that state onto it because now they've got a new belief and they'll project that statement on other organizations too. And we referred to millennials earlier, but if you think about it, early on in a person's career, there's a lot of innocence that comes into an organization. And then over time, that innocence gets destroyed. So when I take my young kids right now, there's a lot of innocence about like their progress and how if they're adding value, they're going to be seen and then they're going to be promoted. And like I'm quietly sitting on the background thinking, well, you know, you get milked at this age and you'll work the 16, 18-hour days because they know they can get away with it until you wake up out of your innocence. There's so much that happens at different phases of our life that we get to know and understand. And the sad part is that when the innocence is gone, the trust is gone, the motivation goes alongside all of that anyways. And then you're there just for the, you know, the grind of getting some income coming back home. And that's a very, very sad place when organizations get to that point.
Yeah, it makes it difficult. So to Richard, we have a question. Any tips on how to handle a situation when an employee's expectations, requests, or demands are beyond what's possible or realistic for the company and avoid getting to the point of going to you for help?
How not to come to me one-on-one.
Yeah.
I love it. And I was actually going to make a comment that takes it back to Caroline's original point, but this is a perfect segue because Socrates, right? Know thyself. Yeah. And so I think the company is tossed around on the seas if you don't know your own value statements. And so you've got an HR person or you've got somebody who's VP of people and culture who's in charge of looking at the staff and saying, okay, what are the parameters of expectations? So if you don't have your values in check, and you don't know what your deal breakers are as a business, you're going to be all over the map. So I think that's a starting point. So figure that out, then set your objectives for employees into the documentation, whether that's the employment agreement or more so a policy, because that's going to frame in, like Carolyn asked, that's going to frame in the discussion with employees. And so you can say, okay, within the parameters of what we've set up as your, you know, employment terms, we can do X, Y, and Z to get you to do your job, and we can have certain expectations on your flexibility and your duties, et cetera. That will frame the conversation. You'll also have policies about bullying and harassment or diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they'll have pretty good definitions about what is illegal behavior, or even beyond that, behavior that the company won't tolerate, whether it's behavior based on, race, religion, image, creed. It can go beyond the scope of the legislation. But unless you have that all managed, you're really kind of at the vagaries of whatever an employee brings forward, and you're scrambling to come up with an answer because you haven't set the rules. And kind of the last thing that comes to mind, without being a windbag, lawyers, am I right? But the last thing that comes to mind is, I think it becomes problematic when you are in an organization and you're managing people and you have an employee who wants to foist the tough decisions on you as the owner. Sometimes people will say, I don't know what I want, I don't know what I need, I don't know how to do the hard work, I don't know what and so you could go in that cycle for a long period of time. And maybe this is where Kindy's work and Pepita, but you can get into these outside coaching situations or counseling situations that can be really beneficial. But if the employee won't do the work to figure out what it is they need, that's where I say you're running into a position where it's best to depart, because you can't solve people.
Yeah, that's right.
But
Well
I mean,
said.
it depends on how much bandwidth you've got to be able to navigate those issues and the size of staff, et cetera.
Yeah, no, I love what everyone is saying here, and just building on what you just said, you have these policies and standard operating procedures and strategy documents and, work plans. And, really push comes to shove, you need to understand how it's actually being executed in practice. So it was really eye-opening for me that, the methodology that we would understand local populations, organizations, turning that lens back on ourselves by going through the public documents for the company, by doing interviews, one-on-one interviews with key staff and leadership and management, and then focus group discussions. It's quite eye-opening to see, oh geez, for me anyway, as the CEO, I'm not doing as well as I should be doing. I can see where I can make improvements here when it comes to employees needing to take sort of that personal accountability. I love both what you're saying, Shannon and Kindy. Yes, that's critical. And I can see as a CEO where I can enhance that well-being benefits. So I don't, no questions asked. Here's $2,000 a year on top of other things that you need to do.
Any tips around unconscious bias and what can be done about it?
Sorry about that, everybody. I'll just finish the thought quickly.
Okay.
and be done with it. The Zoom is quite not as wonderful as I thought it would be, but really kind of stepping back to understand, assess the collective health of the organization through all of your information that's going between yourselves and leadership with a really strong vision. So leadership also is tasked, they understand what they're responsible for, when they need to be notified, when they just need to be, when they need to make a decision, and laying that all out for them so they can make a decision collaboratively with their team. Well, how do we bring in people who can help us with unconscious bias? How do we bring on people who maybe do we need to go here for other kinds of training and decide on that together?
So
that's
Pepita,
what we've been doing well.
Pepita, I'm going to ask you what are some tips around diversity and inclusion, and then I'll go to Kindy and have her answer about unconscious bias.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think it helps again to ensure that for me, it's been about being as transparent as I can be around the logic of my operations and business development, acknowledging that I need a very diverse team to do a lot of the work that we do cross-culturally, globally, as well as here in Canada. So already as a social science-driven organization, we encompass, or we really inherit gender-based plus analysis tools, SOGI understanding, BIPOC understanding. So as a group, we've had this already kind of trained. That's kind of where we live.
What you do.
That's what we do. But really, again, what you don't know, you can't fix. We're going to be constantly surveying ourselves just to check in, make sure people feel safe, to go, hey, this doesn't feel at all like how it's supposed to be. But more importantly, we're giving each other the tools to have difficult conversations. So if someone's being cheeky and maybe implicitly racist, we make this space, and we've been practicing on how to address that discomfort right away. So really building on what Kindy and Shannon was saying around that individual responsibility, we put just as much focus on, because that's the work we do as our bread and butter outside.
So you react fast and maybe have like annual surveys for the whole corporation.
But annual surveys. We're actually going to do it every 6 months. We have like bi-weekly meetings, check-ins. We have an HR person. If no one feels comfortable talking to me and the other 2 leaders, there's other people to address. We have those things set up, and so far so good, but it is quite eye-opening to get the feedback back through surveys and go, oh shoot, I wasn't doing as well, or nope, that was good, that's working, let's keep doing that.
Awesome. And Kindy, any tips around unconscious bias?
For me, the unconscious bias is really a topic that reveals itself through the triggers that you get. So every time you have a judgment about something, every time you feel like an expectation hasn't been met, every time you feel like a need has been ignored, those are very big clues that there's something happening in your psyche that is affecting you adversely. So that's the first responsibility, that it's happening inside you. It's not happening outside of you, even though the trigger point might have been outside of you. It has nothing to do with the outside. It's everything to do with what's going on inside you. Because I might make a judgment about long hair, and Rich is not going to make that same judgment about long hair, right? So it has nothing to do with the fact that I'm wearing long hair and he's got short hair. It has nothing to do with that outside perspective. It's about my perception of what's just happened. So if it's my perception of what's just happened, the basics are that the responsibility lies with the individual that's got triggered. Okay.
So I completely agree with that. So Shannon, would you say when you, as a leader, business owner, you have your clear vision, your mission statement, you know what your value is going to be in your company, then wouldn't you be looking to hire people that not just buy into that, but who are people that want to be self-empowered and are willing to do the deep dive on themselves first? Because some people operate that way naturally and some don't. So is there a way that we can hire people that are more likely to take constructive feedback and take responsibility, say, what's my part in this before rushing to judgment, as an example?
I think that's actually critical for a leadership team, to have people that are willing to do that. I think the how is always the hard question to answer. And where it comes very real for me is, what are the questions that are being asked? And communication is that really such a massive topic. And it's always thrown around as if, oh, we have a communication problem. And I always sit back and I always respond with, I don't think that's what this is. Always. I don't think this is about communication, because it's a cop-out, in my opinion. It's people labeling something as this big overarching massive topic that is so hard to nail down that you never will get to a root cause. So really what we need to do better as leaders and as people who interview is ask questions that are meaningful to identify a willingness to participate in that type of behavior. What is my part in this? What are my unconscious bias? How do I operate when they are triggered? How do I own my own stuff? How do I encourage other people to own their own stuff without making it a blame game? Really anticipating all these, it's one thing to put it to words. It's another thing to put it to practice. So I can explain it all the live long day. But because human beings are so complex and most of our communication is internal, you don't know what you're dealing with until you actually scratch the surface.
Just quickly, Shannon, we have a saying, don't listen to what people say. Listen to how they feel.
That's great.
And that's a practice that, we have well-being moment and really, again, that calming, that softening, where we're not triggered. That, and I love this conversation because you're right. What does that look like? It kind of changes every day, but you need a leader, at least a leadership that's really committed to understanding how people feel.
There's that, and I completely agree with that. The saying that I always operate by is with the leadership teams I work with, specifically, I say, I'm in the room and I'm quiet, but I'm quiet because I'm trying to hear what's not being said. And that is through all the things that you see in facial expressions, body language. And I've said recently, you guys miss it. It's a room of all of, and it's all men. And they move at Mach 12 and they're amazing at what they do. But there's some very simple cues that get missed. And it's not that the answer is there in black and white, it's a flag. So, hey, a flag went up for me when this comment was made, or when that response happened, or that facial expression happened. We should probably find out what that meant. Right. So it's very, very much in the same lane as what you were describing, Peter.
Yes, I think really the key thing is no matter how long you've been in business and where you are, it's good to take a health check, just like you do your annual physical health check on your body and yourself. Do it for your company. And if something's broken, fix it before you have good people leaving and we have lawsuits and everything else.
Yeah.
Also have some empathy for yourself and the organization. The truth is, if a lot of this was actually right in the home before people went out to be employed, much of this would go away. So with good leadership in the home and with a very, very open, trusting environment where when the shit hits the fan, it's actually dealt with rather than, skirted, and where patterns that have been inherited from generations prior are not continued and the chains are broken. If more of this was done right at home, less of an issue and less responsibility would be there for the business. But we're in a messy world where most people don't really know how to lead at home, and we keep repeating the same patterns generation after generation in homes. And then we're putting a lot of responsibility, artificial responsibility, on businesses in areas where they can't actually have an influence. Because even if they had all the will in the might and all the money that could be thrown at them, they wouldn't necessarily have the ability to make it happen because they don't necessarily have the tools. So I think it's better to just be honest around all of this, is that we're going to muddle our way through it because we're trying to fix issues at differing places that is not really where it ought to be happening. The issues ought to be being fixed by each of us in this room individually in our own individual lives. That's really where it all ought to be happening.
Yeah.
So in other words, see your own mess first. So as a leader, look at yourself first, and then look at your company and work on cohesiveness. So
love it. If anybody is walking away with anything today as a leader, please walk away with what Kindy just said, because that's number one. If this is messy, everything else is going to go sideways as a leader.
Yeah.
Perfect. So thank you guys. We're at the top of the hour. So if each of you want to have a parting comment, then we'll wrap this up. Shannon.
I would say to kind of come back to Kindy's comment about have some empathy. Really, really take care in understanding what a person's interests are. What is it that they're trying to protect? And try and understand that before you try and fix anything, because it's not about fixing. It's about understanding and leaving space for them to be who they are.
Yeah. Richard.
Can I do a three-parter?
Yes, you can. You can do anything you want.
As Peter was talking, I was thinking about how you face those moments as a business leader, and you can go with the shiny object, or you can stick to your values. The moment you go for the shiny object or you slip away from your values, you're hooped, you're dead.
Yeah.
So don't let those moments attract you. Number one. Number two is Gestalt theory sometimes can be really important. I think perception's reality. Listening to people's perceptions is key.
Yeah.
And then number three, some solutions, because Caroline is holding us accountable to where's the beef? So I think it's really important to engage people in this room or whomever who can come in as experts from outside the organization. At Ascent, what we do to try to get away from our own bias and hiring in our own image is we have somebody vet our applicants. So we strip away identifying information that's irrelevant, like gender, background, ancestry, things that we don't want to know. And things like that can set up a framework where you're not allowing yourself to be biased. We're not perfect, but that's just one example where I think you can put structures in place that really help. And I love being in this room. Thank you so much. I've taken a lot away from each of you. This has been fantastic.
Thanks, Richard. Kindy.
I think I'm going to sort of piggyback off of what Shannon said about the issue about fixing. Because for me, really, I was a fixaholic for most of my life. I'm going to confess to that, because really it was throw a problem at me and I'm now going to give you a solution, right? That was my mindset. And it wasn't until I actually learned that until I understand myself, there's nothing meaningful that I can really do in my interaction with another human being. Because the more I understand myself and the more I understand what my judgments are, my insecurities are, my needs are, where I fall over, where I don't, etc., the greater my compassion for another human being and my understanding of another human being arises. So I'm going to go back to that same point, that instead of going to the idea of I need to fix what's around me, put some effort into understanding yourself, so that the transformation that you're wanting outside of you can inherently happen because it's happened through you, because you know more of you. That's what I'd like to say.
Pepita.
Oh, I love being here. Thank you for the invite. I feel so inspired and also validated that I'm also on the right path, I believe. But I hear you, Kindy. It does start with us, especially as the ones who hold the vision for why we're here to begin with, and to really focus on our own health. And that's kind of been my, I think people are calling it a midlife crisis, but I'm saying, no, this is my spiritual journey to really ensure that I.
Oh no.
Just getting to the nugget.
I know. It's like we're hanging on a cliff.
Yeah.
Does it every time.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems to have impeccable timing, doesn't it, Kindy?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh,
When it comes to
darn.
Okay,
Sorry.
okay, finish. Give us the nugget, Pepita. You froze again. Just the
I know.
basic clue.
I hope it was like in a good way, but if not, all good. No, I echo what everyone says here, and I couldn't agree more. But yeah, Kindy, I feel you. It does begin with us, and that work is really important, extreme, for all the things that we're touching on today. Thank you.
Well, one thing we want to remember is that we're in a time that we're living on this planet where things are changing really rapidly. And a lot of systems are breaking down, like a lot of systems are crashing. So there has to be some degree of like holding each other's hand, because insecurities are going to flare up right now because so much is not as stable as it used to be. And we've talked about emotional safety, and that's one of the things that is actually being thrown out of the window for almost every person on this planet. So if that's the time that we're in, then let's be clean-hearted about it, to say, look, it's a shaky ground that we're standing on. So if you're shaking on this shaky ground, let's find a way to make you sturdy on it at least, so that we move forward, right? And be more honest about the insecurities that flare up, rather than the tendency to have that fake confidence that sort of says, I'm just going to keep pretending that it's all okay until it's not, right? I think now the humanity is going to come out of people being really, really blunt with one another. And hence why we chose titles like, it's not my job to make you happy, or I don't have the time to do it, or whatever, because it is time to be honest now.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm a big fan of brutal honesty. So thank you guys. I think it was a great discussion. I really appreciate your time and your expertise. And Caroline, thanks for showing up.